Hello, everyone. We welcome you to Glass Academy Webinars 2023. The theme for this year is Art and Science of Designing Responsibly. Today, we have with us architect Tejashree Lakras. Architect Tejashree holds a decade-long experience as a researcher, an academician, and a practitioner in the field of architecture and built heritage conservation. She has always attempted to intersect the knowledge from her conservation practice with architecture academics in order to create a holistic learning and thought-provoking approach both for her students and colleagues. Her experience of working with multiple organizations for heritage awareness and conservation in different places of Maharashtra has been reflected timely in her research papers and presentations at different national and international platforms. To name a few, her Saint Cobain Scholarship Project 2019 culminated into a film and a public exhibition, which not only brought a pause to the demolition of several heritage structures, but also initiated inclusive conservation activities in Old Kalyan, a suburb of Mumbai. With a strong belief in changing the ubiquitous and commercial nature of today's architectural practice through the compatible implementation of indigenous knowledge hidden in built heritage, architect Tejashree has recently started pursuing her PhD in an interdisciplinary department of Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Pune. Welcome, Architect Tejashree. We are delighted to have you here with us today, and we are looking forward to your presentation. Let's hear from you on the topic, From Ruins to Renewal, Adaptive Reuse of Architectural Heritage. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Anvita. Without wasting any more time, I would like to share my screen and start the presentation. So today we are talking about the adaptive reuse of architectural heritage as one of the sensitive method of interventions in the conservation field. And that is very important to understand because today we are lacking very much in the efforts towards the protection of our historical buildings, and almost 70% every year the buildings are facing demolition. And before we start understanding how the adaptive reuse came into picture of Indian conservation, we shall see a very brief background of what is heritage, how it was conceived, and how we went ahead with the conservation in India. So we are all aware that the colonial countries and mostly the developing countries have a very huge dominance and influence of the colonial lifestyle, the European lifestyles, and a very huge influence of adopting and implementing very blindly the modern concepts. So the conservation field was not an exception. It was during colonial India where the Europeans and the British researchers started exploring the history and heritage of India then, and they found it very important to document. And they started reflecting in their research, and one of the main assertion was that Indians need to become conscious and need to become aware about their heritage. And that paved the path for establishing the Archaeological Survey of India, a very first organization established during colonial India for the preservation of heritage, but from the archaeologist point of view, and because of which the preservation comes into the discourse. So the historical buildings should be preserved as it is, should have their authenticity and integrity as inherent from the history, should be kept as it is, and there should not be any modifications or any change made to the fabric of historic buildings. That was the main objective of this organization at the time of its establishment, and that was dominated completely by the discipline of the archaeology. Then we in independent India started looking at our Eurocentric approaches toward conservation, and that happened through the establishment of the non-profit organization, which is called as Indian National Trust of Art and Cultural Heritage, INTAC, which started rethinking about the consciousness towards Indian heritage. They started contextualizing the place-centric approach towards Indian heritage, and they started understanding the drawbacks and the gaps that ASI and its approach has. And this was also reflected, resonated at the international platforms in UNESCO and ICOMOS, where they started saying that different countries, different places should evolve their own approaches towards heritage conservation. But in and all, it should be having a global vision of sustainability. And one of the important parameter that they discussed for conserving the historic building was the adaptive reuse. So through adaptive reuse, internationally, the experts agreed that the sustainability goals can also be achieved, because we will be very much local in our approach. We will try and include the local and their efficiency in developing the adaptive reuse proposals for their heritage, and it will be very contextual in nature. So it will finally and eventually address the sustainability goals. And that is now help us come down to the Indian heritage and Indian approach of conservation, which we shall discuss through different case studies today with respect to, of course, the today's topic, that is adaptive reuse. So, before we start saying that, before we start understanding that where uh, we are going ahead with adaptive reuse and how that is being perceived, how wrong it is, how correct it is, we need to also see that what were the different approaches in government authorities and also the non-profit organizations over the time who adopted. So, for ASI, it was the nationally protected monument sites, like for Taj Mahal. There should be any adaptive reuse being proposed. It should always be compatible to what ASI, their head offices need, what interpretation centers or inspection rooms or storage spaces they need. And it can be proposed only for the ancillary portions and the ancillary spaces of the site. It should not be anywhere proposed in the interiors of the main monument. So that was the take at the Amsar Act in 1958, which ASI had, and that was also very much clear with respect to the preservation of the monument. But Intact came up after 3-4 decades of this take, saying that we need to have the reuse of historical buildings and neighborhoods that is very economically sensible in nature. And it is actually an effective strategy to conserve architectural heritage, particularly by using the traditional craftspeople in the process. Now, this is important when Intact, which is the non-profit organization, is in the process of preparing the charter for India, its context and its own heritage. They are saying that there is a need to include the traditional craftsmen in the process of conservation through adaptive reuse, and which will, of course, uplift the local employment and give financial benefits to the entire neighborhood. So, very fortunately, in 2013, like after a decade of this, CPWD and ASI, CPWD here, Central Public Welfare Department, they started working in cognizance, and they started reflecting upon how Intact and other practitioners, private practitioners, are reflecting upon ASI's rules. So they came up with this grading system, where grade 1 are the nationally protected monuments, which will have the preservation aspects. But grade 2 are open for modification, and there can be the adaptive reuse proposed, but under very strict scrutiny. And care would be taken to ensure the conservation of all special aspects for which it is included in heritage grade 2. So we are now very much clear that there are certain rules and regulations that ASI is sticking to, but there is an openness to have the adaptive reuse to at least the heritage grade 2 buildings. So with this reflection upon the rules and regulations, the guidelines, with my research experience, with my mentors' experience, with my peers' experience, and our reflections in the form of writing literature, I would like to introduce today's adaptive reuse topic with respect to these many parameters. And I must say that this is not exhaustive in nature. This does not cover the entire list of parameters with adaptive reuse that can come up with, but definitely it is indicative in nature. These are the main parameters one should look at before setting up any approach for adaptive reuse in India. So we can go ahead with this one by one. First is the financial benefits. Now, I'm taking a case from Rajasthan. Now, I am also making sure here that it's not only the case of Chomu Palace, but it's actually the case of entire list of palaces and forts in Rajasthan which were converted into heritage hotels. Because Rajasthan is one of those first states across the country which came up with this intervention strategy of adaptive reuse very confidently, and started converting their forts and palaces in heritage hotels or tourist destinations and many other reuse proposals. And they are very much successfully gaining the financial benefits out of it, and they are very much good at the conservation efforts they are taking for their sites. So, because of which, because of the conversions of these sites into hotels, and a kind of commercialization also happened, but to certain extent only. But because the heritage hotels and the tourist destinations are working successfully, so they started maintaining the properties in more conscious manner. And that has led to the film industries also finding and identifying these sites as the filming locations, and again generating a huge amount of revenue and helping them towards the conservation efforts. This does not stop here. The sites are also used for the personal and public ceremonies, the pre-wedding shoots, and the wedding ceremonies of celebrities are held here, and a lot more public ceremonies also happen on yearly basis. So finally, they have acted as a source of inspiration for other states in the country. Now, this is a very recent example, Jadhavgarh near Pune, of a Maratha period fort, which is converted into a heritage hotel. So I had an opportunity to come across the first-hand experiences because my peers and mentors were involved in the conservation process of it, and the government authorities and the owners, the property owners, who were struggling really hard to understand and identify what adaptive reuse they should come up with. So what the team of conservation did, they tried and understand. Through the community survey, a very short local community interviews were taken to understand their perception towards this site, and what they would like this site to be converted into. And a lot uh, opinions were towards the financial gains and towards the financial benefits that we should earn from this site, and make and give different meaning to it, and yet conserve its historical identity. So they came up with this collective solution of heritage hotel, and it is successfully running till date. The next parameter is about the reuse of materials. So it's not only about the adaptive reuse of the spaces of historical buildings, but it can also be about the reuse of materials and putting it back to creation of the new structure. So this is an example of Temple of Japan, where the communities have evolved and derived their indigenous knowledge system in such a way that after every 20 years we shall dismantle the temple and use the same material to reassemble it by giving more strength and more strength sustainability to its entire superstructure and the substructure. Now, why that is happening, why community came up with this solution as a historical action, is because Japan being a country where the climate change is happening historically, and the natural disaster impact is also quite regular. For example, earthquakes, for that matter. So the historical buildings demolishing and falling prey to these natural disasters is very common for them. And yet they do not want to lose any hopes. They do not want to lose their structures and their continuity, because of which they come up with this kind of solution, that the building's strength and sustainability itself can be increased by doing this kind of phenomenon. So this can be a question of authenticity, how authentic the historical building would be. And it was very much discussed with a lot of dichotomies at international platforms like ICOMOS and UNESCO. But very convincingly, the conservation professionals from Japan and the local communities also represented this phenomena as a justified phenomena, and continuing that to again conserve their cultural identity through this kind of conservation approach. Then one cannot really forget about the public memory aspect when it comes to the adaptive reuse of structures. We need to address how the public memory will be sustained through our compatible function proposals. So this is a case of Temple of Nepal, and during the earthquake of 2012, when almost all the temples of Bhaktapur, Nepal were fallen prey to this natural disaster and were destroyed completely. So that happened to that extent that the people were not even left with the materials which can be recomposed or reassembled like Japan is doing for its temples. So what they did, the government authorities started working on the remnants of the temple in this way, and by removing the idol from the sanctum, of course, and started reconstructing it with the new construction methods and the new materials. But they were wanting to have the same space with the same style. But the local communities and the religious trustees were having a problem with this. They were saying that why are we again having the similar kind of style or similar kind of historical materials and being used for the abode uh, of our god, when we are in the position to make new houses and new construction for ourselves even after this huge natural disaster of earthquake. So why not for our God? Why not we should make a new, completely new construction for our God, but in the same place where the historical structure used to exist, and probably with some different traditional style, yet it is evoking the essence of how the Nepali gods are and how the Nepali religious culture works. So this is how the Ganesha temple was rebuilt after the earthquakes. And the government authorities also agreed, because the way locals and the religious trustees helped the conservation professionals put forward this proposal was very convincing in nature. So this can be the form of new sacredness, and and it can be questionable again for the when it comes to the ethics of conservation. But what is more important is the association that locals had with the phenomena and the repercussions of the earthquake, and how they really want themselves, their culture, their deities to be uprising after that whole situation. That is more important than probably what the conservation conventionally is asking us to do. So we shall also see on a regular basis how the adaptive reuse the uh, for the historical structures work. So if there is a proposal of any adaptive reuse for any structure, there is always a first-hand survey done to understand if there are any defects, if there are any structural defects, and because of which the structure is unable to hold the increased amount of population or a changed function that we are proposing, and is it really capable, and is it really having that amount of potential to adopt whatever new function we are proposing. So that survey is done, and that inspection helps us realize that this kind of adaptive reuse for this kind of portions of the structure can be done. So this is an example of the textile mills which were converted into the mall of Mumbai in 2011. And this proposal also faced a lot of criticism from the conservation professionals. But in my opinion, the way it evolved itself and the way it was giving opportunities to the locals also to be a part of this commercial site was more important than how the reuse is and its compatibility to the older function of the structure. So basically, they were the textile mills, and the facade was literally, sorry, not literally, but the facade was differently changed to adopt the commercial malls language and the treatment. Yet they tried having the small, new, and temporary interventions in its open courtyard where the locals can come and exhibit their small scale industry products and again be part of this revenue generation and be part of this whole revolutionary movement that was happening across their entire neighborhood. So this is important where we are seeing that the representation is happening in new style, yet the history and present both are coexisting together. And like I said, did receive the dichotomies and the criticism, but the way locals are perceiving is very positive, and that should be more important in our conservation approach. Another example, which is unfortunately not much talked about, is by Yatin Pandya and his team, who converted this Somnath Chhatralaya, which is in Gujarat, into a girls' hostel. Now, what was the challenge involved in this? That the above images show the how the historical building existed, and the below images show how it is looking like after the renovation. So, what was the challenge involved in it? That the locals and the people whom they surveyed in the neighborhood were having a little different kind of solution for the adaptive use of this building. But the owners and the trustees were already very much into continuation of their underlying values, that is the social service. So before it acted as a shelter for the people who were homeless, and it was on the charity basis. It was receiving funds from non-government organizations, and it was running. And suddenly it stopped running because of lack of funds. But then after few decades, the owners were starting to renew it with a new adaptive reuse approach, with again a few personal benefit gains as well. So in that sense, the Yatin Pandya and team were facing challenges, and for which they said that we should have something which is compatible to their underlying values as well, and something which is also addressing the solution given by the local community survey. And this is where they came up with the girls' hostel. And that's always this is always a common challenge that the people in the conservation profession face, that what is the compatibility of the function that we want to propose to the site. So it should always be inclusive, it should always be addressing to the problem of the site and the owners and also the local neighborhood. What we did with Swatva organization in Ghodbandar Fort was very temporal in nature. It really did not have a permanent reuse, but the intention was to get the attention of government authorities and other non-government organization for funds so that we can start with the conservation of this very site. And we started with the heritage walks and some dramas and plays, which were also attracting the local and the state tourism. And it finally attracted the attention for conservation cause. So these kind of temporal reuse can also be proposed, again with an intention that the site gets attention for its conservation. Now that being said, that we need to be sensitive towards what we propose as an adaptive reuse for the conservation of the site. We also need to, as architects professionals, we also need to see that how can we continue the legacy of this indigenous knowledge and the historical buildings identity through our own practice for the new construction, for the new architecture. So with that intention, I thought of including this parameter as well in the discourse of adaptive reuse. Now, this is an example of Shame Sarhad, which is a resort designed by Hunarshala and its team under the guidance of Kiran Waghela, a very well-renowned personality in the architecture discipline. And what they were doing right after the earthquake which Kutch faced was they were trying to understand how the locals can get benefited and can become again independent to build their own houses. So they had started with a lot of initiatives where the climate friendly and culture friendly houses with low income and with and very economical material were building. They started building with the locals. And one of the initiative was this, that they build a resort, they attract tourism, and they also help uh, in gaining the financial benefits to the locals by generating the employment for them. And because the locals had the potential of craftsmanship and artsmanship, they started using that in the creation of the space. Now here they are making use of the old vocabulary, which is again like an adaptive reuse of the vocabulary. And they are being climate responsive in their approach. They are being rooted to the culture. They are also being responsive to the earthquake disasters, which are again not common, but a very frequent phenomenon in the region of Kutch. So they are trying to understand the historical buildings and knowledge hidden in it, and trying to continue that legacy through their new construction approaches. But they are also generating the employment. And this particular resort project not only brought the tourism to the site, but also brought the professionals' attentions to the site. And the design strategies that they have used were also very attractive. So that kind of acted as a source of inspiration for the contemporary architects. It is a kind of building a new memory of something which is historically old. And one can go on giving examples about how the new architects are giving different approach to their construction techniques by taking the learnings from the historical buildings. So this is one last example that I would like to discuss today with the same parameter, that is the legacy. This is by Ajay Kulkarni and Associates when I was working with him in 2011. And we were trying to understand how the historical Ellora caves, Ajanta caves, and other historical independent buildings of Aurangabad have been so much climate responsive in nature that the multiple courtyard system, the square geometry, the vaulted roof system have also actually affected the air and light ventilation of the internal parts. And that is what Ajay Kulkarni tried, bringing that in the spaces of this Golden Jubilee School, which is close to the Jalna district of Aurangabad in Maharashtra. And after like 10 years in 2021, we did a very short survey of the school to understand how the impact of these design strategies being felt and being experienced by the users. And it was amazing to know that the users were very much satisfied, and they were very much enjoying the spaces the way with the intention they were built by the architect. And that is also equally important. So this is also an example which tells us that how the legacy of the historical buildings can be reused through our construction approaches in the new world. That finally brings me down to this image, which I fail to understand where it belongs to, which place it belongs to, what identity it conveys, whether it is in India it's abroad, whether if it is in India, which metro city it is. And why is it like this? Why does it have a ubiquitous nature of architecture? Where have we gone wrong about conserving our cultural identity and architectural identity through our approaches in conservation in construction? So, with that, I would like to conclude this discussion with four major parameters where adaptive reuse uh, can help us in understanding is that we need to be local in our approach, yet we can still achieve the sustainability goals because we are addressing the climate, we are addressing the culture, we are addressing the local issues, and that means eventually we are addressing the global scenario of sustainability. In developing countries like India, where poverty is one of the major important issues, revenue generation is something which becomes inevitable in conservation. And that is the reason adaptive reuse becomes the most sustainable and most important strategy for historical buildings and their protection. It also helps us in being rooted to cultural identity, brings social equity in the whole discourse, and helps us keeping the coexistence of the local people and the owners intact. And finally, like we said, that the design professionals and the architecture professionals can also get inspired from this whole process, because the conservation field is always inviting the involvement of these professionals, and especially in adaptive reuse and the designs of historical buildings is incomplete without the guidance of the architects. And that actually builds the whole holistic approach, not only for the historic building conservation, but also for the construction of the new buildings across our country. So, with that, again, I would like to just share simply the list of references which can be helpful for the further studies to our audience. And I would like to again thank very much Saint Gobain team and Ethos Empowers team for giving me this pleasing opportunity to share my experiences. And I hope I made sense to my audience. Thank you again.
100%. 100%, ma'am. Thank you so much for providing valuable insights into the transformative power of preserving and repurposing architectural heritage through your presentation. I'm sure the webinar undoubtedly enriched our viewers' understanding of the importance of adaptive reuse and its positive impact on both cultural preservation and sustainable development, and also have a lot of learnings to take away today. And I'm sure they're also curious to know more. So here I am asking you for an opportunity to ask a few questions about that.
Sure, please.
So, ma'ams, architecture as a field is diverse with respect to the opportunities it presents. What initially inspired your interest in built heritage conservation? Could you please share a personal or a professional experience that fueled your passion for this subject?
Yes. So I mentioned about Ajay Kulkarni and Associates. I was part of that team during my internship period in bachelor's. And for us, it was used to be 6 months period. So I got an opportunity to work on Ajanta and Ellora caves conservation and parallelly work on how the inspirations are being taken by Ajay Kulkarni and his team for the new construction. So my thesis was based on that element of heritage and new construction, and I went ahead with my masters in SPA Delhi for conservation, and then started working with Vikas Dilavri and many other conservation architects, which gave me confidence to remain back in the field. Yeah, that
Yes,
was the source of
that's
inspiration.
nice to hear, ma'am. Thank you for sharing that with us. And in your research and practical experience of 10 years, what are some of the significant challenges that you encountered or observed in the process of adaptive reuse of architectural heritage, and how were they addressed?
Yeah, there were many, but I would like to cite an example which was very interesting. We were working in Vai, it's close to Pune, and it's a Peshwa period settlement. And one of the colonial period administrative building was left abandoned for decades. It was located in the midst of residential area, because of which also it did not find any scope for restoration for many years. And government authorities started demolishing it. Started floating a proposal for its demolition. We were approached. We went there and just looking at the site, and with this whole romantic idea of, oh no no, this is heritage and we need to preserve and all. We started our conversation with the authorities, which failed, of course, and because of which we said, okay, let us go back, let me do my homework thoroughly, and let me come back in 3 days. And we did that. We did the survey of residential society. We tried understanding how locals are perceiving, whether they are in the favor of demolishing or conserving the property. And 90% of them were wanting to have that property there. They had their own public memory associated with it. They had their own different associations with the building. And with this confidence, we went back to authorities and we said that, okay, the pre-primary school with a daycare center can be the best solution, which has collectively come up from the brainstorming session of the people and us. So finally the authorities agreed, and now it is going ahead and it is in the process. Yeah, so the
Wow,
different sites have different challenges, and the challenges are really, really tough.
absolutely, ma'am. So this brings uh, to my third question, ma'am, regarding current context. So how do you define modern heritage? And how does the approach of adaptive reuse change with respect to traditional and modern architectural buildings we see
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, because
today?
the combined term modern and heritage in itself have come up with their controversial definitions. Modern, we perceive it very much equal to contemporary, and heritage is something that is inherent historically. And we faced that. We all know that how Hall of Nation case was facing a lot of dichotomies, and so many conservation and architects professionals filed petitions for its survival. But finally it did not happen. But because our heritage guidelines define modern heritage something which is negligible, because we need to have 100 years old historical building to be called as first criteria for the heritage. And if that fails, then we there is no question of declaring it as heritage. And if it is not declared heritage from government authorities, it is going to fall prey to such destructions. So the modern heritage definitely have its own challenges and approaches as compared to the traditional ones. But fortunately, at least the traditional heritage buildings in India are not finding that level of dichotomy. But yes, we are being positive about modern heritage. We are struggling really hard, but I hope to see the positive future for modern heritage as well.
Yes, ma'am. So this brings us to the last question for the day, ma'am. So in what ways does modern adaptive reuse contribute to sustainable development? And how can architects enhance the sustainability aspects of adapting modern structures? So, for example, in what ways can we readapt or reuse a modern, defunct, or an abandoned building that's been unused for many years per se?
Yes, like So I mentioned in my presentation as well that the conservation field is always in search of the holistic approach given by the architects and the designers, and because it's also going to help them back to go back to their field and rethink about their approaches, whether it is sensitive enough to the context they are building into, and whether it is sustainable in its nature. So so to answer that question, the modern heritage, particularly the Art Deco buildings, which we have seen that they have received this UNESCO status, World Heritage Site status. They are also not 100 years old, but then we won that dossier. So now what is happening? Just to give you an example, in Old Kalyan, there is a Art Deco building, and when I was working on this Saint Gobain film, I came across that there is a floating proposal for demolition of it, because what happens in Kalyan, the people are very much into the influence of Maratha Peshwa heritage, Indo-Islamic heritage, and max to max is Parsi heritage. But there is not much space in their memory for the colonial buildings or the post-colonial buildings, because of which this building was unimportant. But then we said, let's go ahead, let's try our best, and that Art Deco residential building, we gave the adaptive reuse proposal of again having the commercial small shops, because it provides a chawl kind of structure which is very much suitable for the old conventional style of commercial complexes. And then now that is also under process, and I hope to see that gets worked out positively. But yes, if the architects are equally involved, then I think the goals of sustainability worldwide, countrywide, can be together achieved, and it will be beneficial for both old, modern, and the new constructions in a way.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely agree with you. Collaborative work will definitely take us way forward. So thank you very much, ma'am. The entire session was very informative and insightful. So on behalf of all of us at Glass Academy and Ethos, we would like to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today and making time for such a intricate and articulated presentation. Thank you very much, ma'am.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.